Chapter 22. In good dark suits, clean-shaven, as polished as their shoes, carrying valises, V-A-L-I-S-E-S. The three arrived in Junior's hospital room even before the usual start of the working day. Wise men without camels, not bearing gifts, but willing to pay a price for grief and loss. Two lawyers and a high-level political appointee, they represented the state, the county, and the insurance company in the matter of the improperly maintained railing on the observation platform at the fire tower. They could not have been more solemn or more respectful if Naomi's corpse, stitched back together, pumped full of embalming fluid, painted with pancake makeup, dressed in white, with her cold hands clasping a Bible to her breast, had been reposing in a casket in this very room, surrounded by flowers, and awaiting the arrival of mourners. They were all polite, soft-spoken, sad-eyed, oozing unctuous concern, and so full of feverish calculation that Junior wouldn't have been surprised if they had set off the ceiling-mounted fire sprinklers. They introduced themselves as Knacker, Hiskus, and Nork, but Junior didn't bother to associate names with faces, partly because the men were so alike in appearance and manner that their own mothers might have had difficulty figuring out which of them to blame for never calling. Besides, he was still tired from his recent ramble through the hospital and unnerved by the thought of some baleful-eyed Bartholomew prowling the world in search of him. After much oily commiseration, sanctimonious babble about Naomi having gone to a better place, and insincere talk of the government's desire always to ensure the public safety and to treat every citizen with compassion, Knacker or Hiskus or Nork finally got around to the issue of compensation. No word as crass as compensation was used, of course. Redress, requital, restitutional apology, which must have been learned in a law school where English was a second language, even atonement. Junior drove them a little crazy by pretending not to understand their intent as they circled the issue like novice snake handlers, warily looking for a safe grip on a coiled cobra. He was surprised they had come so soon, less than 24 hours after the tragedy. This was especially unusual, considering that a homicide detective was obsessed with the idea that rotting wood alone was not responsible for Naomi's death. Indeed, Junior suspected that they might be here at Vanadium's urging. The cop would be interested in determining how avaricious the mourning husband would prove to be when presented with the opportunity to turn his wife's cold flesh into cash. Knacker or Hiskus or Nork was talking about an offering, as though Naomi were a goddess to whom they wished to present a penance of gold and jewels. Sick of them, Junior pretended that he was just now getting their drift. He didn't fake outrage or even distaste because he knew he might unwittingly oversell any strong reaction, striking a false note and raising suspicion. Instead, with grave courtesy, he quietly told them that he wanted no settlement for his wife's death or for his own suffering. Money can't replace her. I'd never be able to spend a penny of it, not a penny. I'd have to give it away. What would be the point? After a silent moment of surprise, Nork or Knacker or Hiskus said, "Your sentiment is understandable, Mr. Kane, but it's customary in these matters." Junior's throat wasn't half as sore as it had been the previous afternoon, and to these men his soft, coarse voice must have sounded not abraded but raw with emotion. "I don't care what's customary. I don't want anything. I don't blame anyone. These things happen. If you have a liability release with you, I'll sign it right now." Hiskus, Nork, and Knacker exchanged sharp glances, nonplussed. Finally, one of them said, "We couldn't do that, Mr. Kane. Not until you've consulted an attorney." "I don't want an attorney." He closed his eyes, lowered his head to the pillow, and sighed. "I just want peace." Knacker, Hiskus, and Nork all talking at once, then falling silent as if they were a single organism, then talking in rotation but interrupting one another, tried to advance their agenda. Although he had made no effort to summon them, tears spilled from Junior's closed eyes. They weren't drawn from him by thoughts of poor Naomi. These next few days, perhaps weeks, were going to be tedious until he could have Nurse Victoria Bressler. Under the circumstances, he had good reason to feel sorry for himself. His silent tears accomplished what his words could not. Nork, Knacker, and Hiscus retreated, urging him to speak to his attorney, promising to return, once more expressing their deepest condolences, perhaps as abashed as attorneys and political appointees could get, but certainly confused and unsure how to proceed when dealing with a man so untouched by greed, so free of anger, so forgiving as the widower Cain. Everything was proceeding precisely as Junior had envisioned it the instant when Naomi had first discovered the rotten section of railing and had nearly fallen without assistance. The entire plan had come to him wholly formed in a blink, and during the following 2 circuits of the observation deck, he had mulled it over, seeking flaws, but finding none. Thus far, there were only 2 unexpected developments, the first being his explosive vomiting. He hoped he would never have to endure another such episode. That Olympian purge had, however, made him appear to be both emotionally and physically devastated by the loss of his wife. He couldn't have calculated any stratagem more likely to convince most people that he was innocent and, in fact, constitutionally incapable of premeditated murder. He had experienced considerable self-revelation during the past 18 hours, but of all the new qualities he had discovered in himself, Junior was most proud of the realization that he was such a profoundly sensitive person. This was an admirable character trait, but it would also be a useful screen behind which to commit whatever ruthless acts were required in this dangerous new life he'd chosen. The other of the 2 unexpected developments was Vanadium, the lunatic lawman. Tenacity personified, tenacity with a bad haircut. As his drying tears became stiff on his cheeks, Junior decided that he would most likely have to kill Vanadium to be rid of him and fully safe. No problem. And in spite of his exquisite sensitivity, he was convinced that wasting the detective would not trigger in him another bout of vomiting. If anything, he might pee his pants in sheer delight. Chapter 23. Celestina returned to room 724 to collect Feemy's belongings from the tiny closet and from the nightstand. Her hands trembled as she attempted to fold her sister's clothes into the small suitcase. What should have been a simple task became a daunting challenge. The fabric seemed to come alive in her hands and slip through her fingers, resisting every attempt to organize it. When eventually she realized there was no reason to be neat, she tossed the garments into the bag without concern for wrinkling them. Just as Celestina snapped shut the latches on the suitcase and turned to the door, a nurse's aide entered, pushing a cart loaded with towels and bed linens. This was the same woman who had been stripping the second bed when Celestina arrived earlier. Now she was here to remake the first. "I'm so sorry about your sister," the aide said. "Thank you. She was so sweet." Celestina nodded, unable to respond to the aide's kindness. Sometimes kindness can shatter as easily as soothe. "What room has Mrs. Lombardi been moved to?" she asked. "I'd like to see her before I go." "Oh, didn't you know? I'm sorry, but she's gone too." "Gone," Celestina said, but understood. Indeed, subconsciously she had known that Nella was gone since receiving the call at 4:15 this morning. When the old woman had finished what she needed to say, the silence on the line had been eerily perfect, without one crackle of static or electronic murmur, unlike anything Celestina had ever heard on a telephone before. "She died last night," said the aide. "Do you know when? The time of death?" "A few minutes after midnight." "You're sure? Of the time, I mean?" "I'd just come on duty. I'm working a shift and a half today. She passed away in the coma without waking." In Celestina's mind, as clear as it had been on the phone at 4:15 a.m., The frail voice of an old woman warned of Feemy's crisis. "Come now." "What?" "Come now. Come quickly." "Who's this?" "Nella Lombardi. Come now. Your sister will soon be dying." If the call had really come from Mrs. Lombardi, she had placed it more than 4 hours after she died. And if it hadn't come from the old woman, who had impersonated her, and why? When Celestina had arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, Sister Josephina had expressed surprise. "I didn't know they'd been able to reach you. They only started trying 10 minutes ago." The call from Nella Lombardi had come before Feemy was stricken with eclamptic seizures and rushed to surgery. "Your sister will soon be dying." "Are you all right, dear?" the nurse's aide asked. Celestina nodded, swallowed hard. Bitterness had flooded her heart when Feemy died, and hatred for the child that had lived at the mother's expense. Feelings she knew were not worthy of her, but which she could not cast out. These two amazements stopped Dr. Lipscomb's story, and Nella's telephone call were an antidote to hatred, a balm for anger, but they also left her half dazed. "Yes, thank you," she told the aide. "I'll be okay." Carrying the suitcase, she left room 724. In the corridor, she halted, looked left, looked right, and didn't know where to go. Had Nella Lombardi, no longer of this beautiful world, reached back across the void to bring two sisters together in time for them to say goodbye to each other? And had Feemy, retrieved from death by the resuscitation procedures of the surgical team, repaid Nella's kindness with her own stunning message to Lipscomb? From childhood, Celestina was encouraged to be confident that life had meaning, and when she needed to share that belief with Dr. Lipscomb as he'd struggled to come to terms with his experience in the operating room, she'd done so without hesitation. Strangely, however, she herself was having difficulty absorbing these two small miracles. Although she was aware that these extraordinary events would shape the rest of her life, beginning with her actions in the hours immediately ahead of her, she could not clearly see what she ought to do next. At the core of her confusion was a conflict of mind and heart, reason and faith, but also a battle between desire and duty. Until she was able to reconcile these opposed forces, she was all but paralyzed by indecision. She walked the corridor until she came to a room with empty beds. Without turning on the lights, she entered, put down the suitcase, and sat in a chair by the window. Even as the morning matured, the fog and the rain conspired to bar all but a faint gray daylight from St. Mary's. Shadows flourished. Celestina sat studying her hands, so dark in the darkness. Eventually, she discovered within herself all the light that she needed to find her way through the crucial hours immediately ahead. At last, she knew what she must do, but she was not certain that she possessed the fortitude to do it. Her hands were slender, long-fingered, graceful, the hands of an artist. They were not powerful hands. She thought of herself as a creative person, a capable and efficient and committed person, but she did not think of herself as a strong person. Yet she would need great strength for what lay ahead. Time to go. Time to do what must be done. She could not get up from the chair. Do what must be done. She was too scared to move. Chapter 24. Edom and the pies, into the blue morning following the storm, had a schedule to keep and the hungry to satisfy. He drove his yellow and white 1955 Ford Country Squire station wagon. He bought the car with some of the last money he earned in the years when he had been able to hold a job before his problem. Once he had been a superb driver. For the past decade, his performance behind the wheel depended on his mood. Sometimes just the thought of getting in the car and venturing into the dangerous world was intolerable. Then he settled into his lazy boy and waited for the natural disaster that would soon scrub him off the earth as though he had never existed. This morning, only his love for his sister, Agnes, gave him the courage to drive and to become the pie man. Agnes's big brother by 6 years, Edom had lived in one of the two apartments above the large detached garage behind the main house since he was 25 when he left the working world. He was now 36. Edam's twin, Jacob, who had never held a job, lived in the second apartment. He'd been there since graduating from high school. Agnes, who inherited the property, would have welcomed her brothers in the main house. Although both were willing to visit her for an occasional dinner or to sit in rocking chairs on the porch on a summer night, neither could abide living in that ominous place. Too much had happened in those rooms. They were stained dark with family history, and in the night when either Edam or Jacob slept under that gabled roof, the past came alive again in dreams. Edam marveled at Agnes's ability to rise above the past and to transcend so many years of torment. She was able to see the house as simple shelter, whereas to her brothers it was, and always would be, the place in which their spirits had been shattered. Even living within sight of it would have been out of the question if they had been employed with options. This was one of many things about Agnes that amazed Edam. If he had dared to make a list of all the qualities that he admired in her, he would have sunk into despair at the consideration of how much better she had coped with adversity than either he or Jacob. When Agnes had asked him to deliver the pies before she had set out with Joey for the hospital the previous day, Edam had wanted to beg off, but he had agreed without hesitation. He was prepared to suffer every viciousness that nature could throw at him in this life, but he could not endure seeing disappointment in his sister's eyes. Not that she ever gave any indication that her brothers were other than a source of pride for her. She treated them always with respect, tenderness, and love, as if unaware of their shortcomings. She dealt with them equally too, favoring neither, except in the matter of pie delivery. On those rare occasions when she could not make the rounds herself and when she had no one to turn to but her brother, Agnes always asked for Edam's help. Jacob scared people. He was Edam's identical twin, with Edam's boyish and pleasant face, as soft-spoken as Edam, well-barbered and neatly groomed. Nevertheless, on the same mission of mercy as Edam, Jacob would leave the pie recipients in a state of deep uneasiness, if not outright terror. In his wake, they would bar the doors, load guns if they owned any, and lay sleepless for a night or two. Consequently, Edam was abroad in the land with pies and parcels, following a list of names and addresses provided by his sister. Even though he believed an unprecedentedly violent earthquake, the fabled big one, was likely to strike before noon, certainly before dinner. This was the last day of the rest of his life. The strange barrage of lightning, putting an end to the rain rather than initiating it, had been a clue. The rapid clearing of the sky, indicating a stiff wind at high altitudes, while stillness prevailed at ground level, a sudden plunge in the humidity, and an unseasonable warmth confirmed the coming catastrophe. Earthquake weather. Southern Californians had many definitions of that term, but Edam knew he was right this time. Thunder would roll again soon, but it would arise from underfoot. Driving defensively, keenly alert for toppling telephone poles, collapsing bridges, and not least of all the abrupt appearance of car-swallowing fissures in the pavement, Edam arrived at the first address on Agnes's list. The modest clapboard house had received no maintenance in a long time. Silvered by years of insistent sun, bare wood showed through peeling paint like dark bones. At the end of a gravel driveway, a battered Chevy pickup stood on bald tires under a sagging carport. Here in the eastern outskirts of Bright Beach, on the side of the hills that offered no view of the sea, the tireless desert encroached when residents were not diligent. Sage and wood sorrel and all manner of scrub bristled where backyards ended. The recent storm had blown tumbleweeds out of the barrens. They were snared in domestic shrubs piled against one wall of the house. Green during the rainy season, the lawn, lacking a sprinkler system, would be crisp and brown in April through November. Even in this slush phase, it was as much weeds and creeping sandburr as grass. Carrying one of the 6 blueberry pies, Edam walked through the unmown lawn and up the swayback steps onto the front porch. This was not a house he would choose to occupy when the quake of the century rocked the coast and leveled mighty cities. Agnes's instructions, unfortunately, were that Edom must not merely drop the gifts and run, but must visit for a short while and be as neighborly as it was within his nature to be. Jolene Clefton answered his knock, dowdy, in her early 50s, wearing a shapeless house dress. Flyaway brown hair as lusterless as Mojave dust. Her face was enlivened by a wealth of freckles, however, and her voice was both musical and warm. Edom, you look as handsome as that singer on the Lawrence Welk show, you really do. Come in, come in. As Jolene stepped aside to let him enter, Edom said, Agnes was in a baking frenzy again. We'll be eating blueberry pie till we're blue. She said maybe you'd relieve us of one. Thank you, Edom. Where is herself this morning? Though she tried to hide it, Jolene was disappointed. Anybody would have been that Edom rather than Agnes was at her door. He took no offense. She had the baby last night, he announced. With a girlish cry of delight, Jolene shouted to her husband, Bill, who wasn't here, in the living room, Agnes had her baby. A boy, Edom said. She named him Bartholomew. It's a boy named Bartholomew, Jolene shouted to Bill, and then she urged Edom to follow her into the kitchen. Outside in the station wagon were boxes of groceries, a smoked ham, fancy canned goods for the Cleftons. Edom would carry those in later, making it seem as if the groceries were an afterthought. According to Agnes, bringing the homemade pie first and sitting for a spell made the entire delivery seem not like an act of charity, but like simple sharing by a friend. The kitchen was small with ancient appliances, but it was bright and clean, and the air smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Bill was not here either. Jolene pulled out a chair from the breakfast table. Sit. She put the pie on a counter and brought 3 coffee mugs to the table. I'll bet he's a special boy, a fine boy, isn't he? Haven't seen him. Talked to Agnes on the phone this morning, and she said he's wonderful. A great thatch of hair. Born with a full head of hair. Agnes... I think it's a typo. I think it's supposed to say Jolene shouted to her husband as she filled the mugs with hot coffee. It says Agnes, but I think it's supposed to say Jolene. From the far end of the house came a slow, rhythmic thumping, Bill making his way toward the kitchen. She says his eyes are especially beautiful. Emeralds and sapphires, she says. Calls them Tiffany eyes. The boy has such eyes, Jolene shouted to Bill. As Jolene brought plates and a coffee cake to the table, Bill arrived, pulling himself along on a pair of sturdy canes. He was in his 50s too, but looked 10 years older than his wife. Blamed time for his thinning white hair, but his ruddy, bloated face was a consequence of illness and medication. Rheumatoid arthritis had twisted his hips. He should have graduated to crutches or a walker, but pride kept him on the canes. Pride, too, had kept him on the job long after pain should have prevented him from working. Unemployed now for 5 years, he was trying, with diminishing success, to live on disability payments. Bill swung into a chair and hooked the canes on the back of it. He held out his right hand to Edom. The hand was gnarled, the knuckles swollen and misshapen. Edom pressed it lightly, afraid of causing pain, even with a gentle touch. Tell us all about the baby, Bill encouraged. Where'd they get the name Bartholomew? I'm not really sure. Edom accepted a plate with a slice of cake from Jolene. Far as I know, it wasn't on their list of favorites. He didn't have much to say about the baby, only what Agnes had told him. He'd already related most of those details to Jolene. Nevertheless, he went through it all again. He embellished a little, in fact, stalling for time, dreading a question that would force him to share with them the bad news. And here it came from Bill. Is Joey just bursting with pride? Edom's mouth was full, so he was spared the expectation of an immediate answer. He chewed until it seemed that his slice of cake must be as tough as gristle, and when he realized Jolene was staring curiously, he nodded as though answering Bill's question. He paid for this deception, the nod, when he tried to swallow the cake and couldn't get it down. Afraid of choking, he grabbed his coffee and dislodged a stubborn wad with hot black brew. He couldn't talk about Joey. Breaking the news would be like murder. Until Edom actually told someone about the accident, Joey wasn't really dead. Words made it real. Until Edom spoke the words, Joey was still alive somehow, at least for Jolene and Bill. This was a crazy thought, irrational. Nevertheless, the news about Joey stuck in his throat more stubbornly than the wad of cake. He spoke instead about a subject with which he was comfortable, doomsday. Does this seem like earthquake weather to you? Surprise, Bill said. It's a fine day for January. The 1,000-year quake is overdue, Edom warned. 1,000-year? Jolene said, frowning. The San Andreas should have a magnitude 8.5 or greater quake once every 1,000 years to relieve stress on the fault. It's hundreds of years overdue. Well, it won't happen on the day Agnes's baby is born, I'll guarantee you that, said Jolene. He was born yesterday, not today, Edom said glumly. When the 1,000-year quake hits, skyscrapers will pancake, bridges crumble, dams break. In 3 minutes, 1 million people will die between San Diego and Santa Barbara. Then I better have more cake, Bill said, pushing his plate toward Jolene. Oil and natural gas pipelines will fracture, explode. A sea of fire will wash cities, killing hundreds of thousands more. You figure all this, Jolene asked, because Mother Nature gives us a nice warm day in January. Nature has no maternal instincts, Edom said quietly, but with conviction. To think otherwise is sheer sentimentality at its worst. Nature is our enemy. She's a vicious killer. Jolene started to refill his coffee mug, then thought better of it. Maybe you don't need more caffeine, Edom. Do you know about the earthquake that destroyed 70% of Tokyo and all of Yokohama on September 1st, 1923, he asked. They still had enough gumption left to fight World War II, Bill noted. After the quake, Edom said 40,000 people took refuge in a 200-acre open area, a military depot. A quake-related fire swept through so fast they were killed standing up, so tightly packed together they died as a solid mess of bodies. Well, we have earthquakes here, Jolene said, but back east they have all those hurricanes. Our new roof, Bill said, pointing overhead, will hold us through any hurricane. Fine work. You tell Agnes what fine work it is. Having gotten the roof for them at cost, Agnes subsequently put together donations from a dozen individuals and one church group to cover all but $200 of the outlay. The hurricane that hit Galveston, Texas back in 1900 killed 6,000 people, Edom said, virtually obliterated the place. That was all of 65 years ago, Jolene said. Less than a year and a half ago, Hurricane Flora, she killed over 6,000 in the Caribbean. Wouldn't live in the Caribbean if you paid me, Bill said. All that humidity, all those bugs. But nothing equals a quake for killing. Big one in Shaanxi, China, killed 830,000. Bill wasn't impressed. They build houses out of mud in China. No wonder everything falls down. This was back on January 24th, 1556, said Edom, with unhesitating authority, for he had memorized tens of thousands of facts about the worst natural disasters in history. 1556, Bill frowned. Hell, the Chinese probably didn't even have mud back then. Fortifying herself with more coffee, Jolene said, Edom, you were going to tell us how Joey's coping with fatherhood. Glancing at his wristwatch with alarm, Edom bolted up from his chair. Look at the time. Agnes gave me a lot to do, and here I am rattling on about earthquakes and cyclones. Hurricanes, Bill corrected. They're different from cyclones, aren't they? Don't get me started on cyclones. Edom hurried through the house and out to the station wagon to fetch the boxes of groceries. The blue vault above, cloudless now, was the most threatening sky that Edom had ever seen. The air was astonishingly dry so soon after a storm, and still, hushed, earthquake weather. Before this momentous day was done, great tumblers and 500-foot tidal waves would rock and swamp the coast. Chapter 25. Of the 7 newborns, none was fussing, too fresh to the world to realize how much was here to fear. One nurse and one nun brought Celestina into the creche behind the viewing window. She strove to appear calm, and she must have succeeded, because neither woman seemed to realize that she was scared almost to the point of paralysis. She moved woodenly, joints stiff, muscles tense. The nurse lifted the infant from its bassinet. She gave it to the nun. Cradling the baby, the nun turned with it to Celestina, folding back a thin blanket to present her with a good look at the tiny girl. Breath held, Celestina confirmed what she had suspected about the child since the quick glimpse she'd had in the surgery. Its skin was café au lait with a warming touch of caramel. Over many proud generations, and at least the extent of second cousins, no one on either side of Celestina's family had skin of this light color. They were without exception medium to dark mahogany, many shades darker than this infant. Feemy's rapist must have been a white man, someone she had known, someone Celestina too might know. He lived in or around Spruce Hills because Feemy had considered him still to be a threat. Celestina had no illusions about playing detective. She would never be able to track down the bastard, and she had no stomach for confronting him. Anyway, the thing that scared her was not the monstrous father of this child. The fearsome thing was the decision that she had made a few minutes ago in the unused hospital room on the 7th floor. Her entire future was at stake if she acted as she had decided to act. Here, in the presence of the baby, within the next minute or two, she must either change her mind or commit herself to a more difficult and challenging life than any she had envisioned only this morning. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. Without hesitation, the nun transferred the infant to Celestina. The baby felt too light to be real. She weighed 5 pounds 14 ounces, but she seemed lighter than air, as though she might float up and out of her aunt's arms. Celestina stared at the small brown face, opening herself to the anger and hatred with which she had regarded this child in the operating room. If the nun and the nurse could know the loathing that Celestina had felt earlier, they would never allow her here in the crèche, never trust her with this newborn, this spawn of violence, this killer of her sister. She searched the child's unfocused eyes for some sign of the hateful father's wickedness. The little hands, so weak now but someday strong, would they eventually be capable of savagery, as were the father's hands? This misbegotten offspring, this seed of a demonic man whom Feemy herself had called sick and evil. However innocent-looking now, what pain might she eventually inflict on others? What outrages might she commit in years to come? Although Celestina searched intently, she could not glimpse the father's evil in the child. Instead, she saw Feemy reborn. She saw as well a child endangered. Somewhere out there was a rapist capable of extreme cruelty and violence, a man who would, if Feemy was correct, react unpredictably if ever he learned of his daughter's existence. Angel, if that's what she were eventually to be named, lived under a threat as surely as had all the children of Bethlehem who had been slain according to the decree of King Herod. The baby curled one small hand around her aunt's index finger. So tiny, fragile, she nonetheless gripped with surprising tenacity. Do what must be done. Returning the newborn to the nun, Celestina asked for the use of a telephone and for privacy. The social worker's office once more. Rain tapping lightly at the window where Dr. Lipscomb had stared intently into the fog as he tried to avoid confronting the life-changing revelation that Feemy, speaking with a special knowledge of the once dead, had shown him. Sitting at the desk, Celestina phoned her parents again. She shook uncontrollably, but her voice was steady. Her mother and father used different extensions, both on the line with her. "I want you to adopt the baby." Before they could react, she hurried on. "I won't be 21 for 4 months yet, and even then they might give me trouble about adopting, even though I'm her aunt, because I'm single. But if you adopt her, I'll raise her. I promise I will. I'll take full responsibility. You don't have to worry that I'll regret it or that I'll ever want to drop her in your laps and escape the responsibility. She'll have to be the center of my life from here on. I understand that. I accept it. I embrace it. She worried that they would argue with her, and though she knew that she was committed to her decision, she was afraid to have that commitment tested just yet. Instead, her father asked, "Is this emotion talking, Celie, or is this brain as much as heart?" "Both, brain and heart. But I've thought it through, Daddy. More than anything in my life, I've thought this through." "What aren't you telling us?" her mother pressed, intuiting the existence of a larger story, if not the amazing nature of it. Celestina told them about Nella Lombardi and about the message Femi delivered to Dr. Lipscomb after being resuscitated. Femi was so special. There's something special about her baby, too. "Remember the father," Grace cautioned. And the Reverend added, "Yes, remember, if blood tells..." "We don't believe it does, do we, Daddy?" "We don't believe blood tells. We believe we're born to hope under a mantle of mercy, don't we?" "Yes," he said softly, "we do." A siren in the city wailed toward St. Mary's, an ambulance, through streets bustling with hope, always this lament for the dying. Celestina looked up from the scarred top of the desk toward the fog-white sky beyond the window, from reality to the promise. She told them of Femi's request that the baby be named Angel. At the time, I assumed she wasn't able to think clearly because of the stroke. If the baby was going to be adopted out, the adoptive parents would name it. But I think she understood or somehow knew that I would want to do this, that I would have to do this. "Celie," her mother said, "I'm so proud of you. I love you so much for wanting this. But how is it possible to carry on with your studies, your work, and take care of a baby?" Celestina's parents weren't well off. Her father's church was small and humble. They managed to worry up tuition for art school, but Celestina worked as a waitress to pay for her studio apartment and other needs. "I don't have to graduate in the spring of next year. I can take fewer classes, graduate the spring after. That's no big deal." "Oh, Celie," she rushed on. "I'm one of the best waitresses they have, so if I ask for dinner shifts only, I'll get them. Tips are better at dinner, and working the one shift, 4.5 to 5 hours, I'll have a regular schedule." "Then who will be with the baby?" "Sitters, friends, relatives of friends, people I can trust. I can afford sitters if I'm getting only dinner tips." "Better we should raise her, your father and me." "No, Mom, that won't work. You know it won't." The Reverend said, "I'm sure you underestimate my parishioners, Celestina. They won't be scandalized. They'll open their hearts." "It isn't that, Daddy. You remember when we were all together the day before yesterday, how afraid Femi was of this man? Not just for herself, for the baby. I won't have the baby here. If he realizes he made a baby with me, it'll make him crazier. I know it will." "He won't harm a little child," her mother said. "He wouldn't have any reason." "If he's crazy and evil, then he doesn't need a reason. I think Femi was convinced he'd kill the baby. And since we don't know who this man is, we have to trust her instincts." "If he's such a monster, then if he ever learns about the baby," her mother worried, "maybe you won't be safe even in San Francisco." "He'll never know. We have to make sure he never knows." Her parents were silent, contemplating. From the corner of the desk, Celestina picked up a framed photo of the social worker and her family. Husband, wife, daughter, son. The little girl smiled shyly through braces. The boy was impish. In this portrait, she saw bravery beyond words. Creating a family in this turbulent world is an act of faith, a wager that against all odds there will be a future, that love can last, that the heart can triumph against all adversities and even against the grinding wheel of time. "Grace," the Reverend said, "what do you want to do?" "This is a hard thing you're putting on yourself, Celie," her mother warned. "I know. Honey, it's one thing to be a loving sister, but there's a world of difference between that and being a martyr. I held Feme's baby, Mom. I held her in my arms. What I felt wasn't just sentimental gush. You sound so sure. When hasn't she since the age of 3, her father said with great affection. I'm meant to be this baby's guardian, Celestina said, to keep her safe. She's special, but I'm no selfless martyr. There's joy in this for me, already at just the thought of it. I'm scared, sure. Oh, Lord, am I scared. But there's joy, too. Brain and heart, her father asked again. All of both, she confirmed. What I insist upon, said her mother, is coming down there for a few months at the beginning to help out until you get organized, until you figure out the rhythm of it. And thus it was agreed. Although sitting in a chair, Celestina felt herself crossing a deep divide between her old life and her new, between the future that might have been and the future that would be. She was not prepared to raise a baby, but she would learn what she needed to know. Her ancestors had endured slavery, and on the shoulders of generations, she now stood free. What sacrifices she made for this child could not rightly be called sacrifices at all, not in the harsh light of history. Compared to what others had undergone, this was easy duty. Generations had not struggled so that she could shirk it. This was honor and family. This was life, and everyone lived his life in the shadow of one solemn obligation or another. Likewise, she wasn't prepared to deal with a monster like the father, if one day he came for Angel. And he would come, she knew. In these events, as in all things, Celestina White glimpsed a pattern, complex and mysterious, and to the eye of an artist, the symmetry of the design required that one day the father would come. She wasn't prepared to deal with the creep now, but by the time that he arrived, she would be ready for him. Chapter 26. After undergoing tests for brain tumors or lesions to ascertain whether his seizure of violent emesis might in fact have a physical cause, Junior was returned to his hospital room shortly before noon. No sooner was he abed once more than he cringed at the sight of Thomas Vanadium in the doorway. The detective entered carrying a lunch tray. He put it on the adjustable bedstand, which he swung over Junior's lap. Apple juice, lime jello, and 4 soda crackers, said the detective. If you don't have enough of a conscience to make you confess, then this diet ought to break your will. I assure you, Enoch, the fare is far better in any Oregon prison. What's wrong with you? Junior demanded. As though he'd not understood that the question required a reply, and had not heard the implied rebuke, Vanadium went to the window and raised the Venetian blind, emitting such powerful sunlight that the glare seemed to crash into the room. It's a sunshine cake sort of day, Vanadium announced. Do you know that old song, Sunshine Cake, Enoch, by James Van Heusen, a great songwriter? Not his most famous tune. He also wrote All the Way and Call Me Irresponsible, Come Fly With Me. That was one of his too. Sunshine Cake is a minor tune, but a nice one. This patter poured out in the detective's patented drone. His fat face was as expressionless as his voice was uninflected. Please close that, Junior said. It's too bright. Turning from the window, approaching the bed, Vanadium said, I'm sure you'd prefer darkness, but I need to get some light under that rock of yours to see your expression when I give you the news. Although he knew it was dangerous to play along with Vanadium, Junior couldn't stop himself from asking, what news? Aren't you going to drink your apple juice? What news? The lab didn't find any ipecac in your spew. Any what? Junior asked because he had pretended to be asleep when Vanadium and Dr. Parkhurst had discussed ipecac the previous night. No ipecac, no other emetic, and no poison of any kind. Naomi had been cleared of suspicion. Junior was pleased that their brief and beautiful time together would not forever be clouded by the possibility that she was a treacherous bitch who had tainted his food. I know you induced vomiting somehow, the detective said, but it looks like I'm not going to be able to prove it. Listen here, detective. These sick insinuations that somehow I had something to do with my wife's... Vanadium held up a hand as though to halt him and spoke over his complaint. Spare me the outrage. Besides, I'm not insinuating anything. I'm flat out accusing you of murder. Were you humping another woman, Enoch? Is that where your motivation lies? This is disgusting. To be honest, and I'm always honest with you, I can't find any hint of another woman. I've talked to a lot of people already, and everyone thinks you and Naomi were faithful to each other. I loved her. Yeah, you said, and I already conceded that might even be true. Your apple juice is getting warm. According to Caesar Zed, one cannot be strong until one first learns how always to be calm. Strength and power come from perfect self-control, and perfect self-control arises only from inner peace. Inner peace, Zed teaches, is largely a matter of deep, slow, and rhythmic breathing, combined with a determined focus not on the past or even on the present, but on the future. In his bed, Junior closed his eyes and breathed slowly, deeply. He focused on thoughts of Victoria Bressler, the nurse who waited anxiously to please him in the days ahead. Actually, Vanadium said, mainly I came to get my quarter. Junior opened his eyes but continued to breathe properly to ensure calm. He tried to imagine what Victoria's breast would look like, freed from all restraint. Standing near the foot of the bed in a shapeless blue suit, Vanadium might have been the work of an eccentric artist who had carved a man out of spam and dressed the meaty sculpture in thrift shop threads. With the stocky detective looming, Junior wasn't able to stroke his imagination into an erotic mood. In his mind's eye, Victoria's ample bosom remained concealed behind a starched white uniform. Cop's pay being what it is, Vanadium said every quarter counts. Magically, a quarter appeared in his right hand, between thumb and forefinger. This could not be the quarter that he had left with Junior in the night. Impossible. All day, for reasons he couldn't quite put into words, Junior had carried that quarter in a pocket of his bathrobe. From time to time, he had taken it out to examine it. Returning from his tests, he'd gotten into bed without stripping off the thin hospital issue robe. He was still wearing it over his pajamas. Vanadium couldn't know the whereabouts of the quarter. Besides, even when he'd swung the lunch tray over Junior's lap, the detective hadn't been close enough to pick the pocket of the robe. This was a test of Junior's gullibility, and he would not give Vanadium the satisfaction of searching his robe for the coin. I'm going to file a complaint about you, Junior promised. I'll bring you the proper form next time I visit. Vanadium flipped the quarter straight into the air and at once spread his arms, palms turned up to show that his hands were empty. Junior had seen the silvery coin snapping off the cop's thumb and spinning upward. Now it was gone as though it had vanished in midair. For an instant his attention had been distracted by Vanadium's presentation of his empty hands. Nevertheless, there was no way the cop could have snatched the coin out of the air. Yet, uncaught, the quarter would have dropped to the floor. Junior would have heard it ring off the tiles, which she hadn't. As quick as a snake strikes, Vanadium was much closer to the bed than he had been when he tossed the coin. At Junior's side now, leaning over the railing, Naomi was 6 weeks pregnant. What? That's the news I mentioned. Most interesting thing in the autopsy report. Junior had thought the news was the lab report, which had found no ipecac in his spew. All that had been distraction. Those spike-sharp eyes, tenpenny gray, nailed Junior to the bed, pinning him for scrutiny. Here now came the anaconda smile. Did you argue about the baby, Enoch? Maybe she wanted it and you didn't. Guy like you, a baby would cramp your style. Too much responsibility. I didn't know. Blood tests should reveal whether the child's yours or not. That also might explain all this. I was going to be a father, Junior said with genuine awe. Have I found the motive, Enoch? Astonished and appalled by the cop's insensitivity, Junior said, You just dropped this on me. I lost my wife and my baby. My wife and my baby. You're as good with the illusion of torment as I am with the corner. Tears burst from Junior, stinging torrents, a sea salt of grief that blurred his vision and bathed his face in brine. Get out of here, you disgusting, sick son of a bitch, he demanded, his voice simultaneously shaking with sorrow and twisted by righteous anger. Get out of here now, get out! As he headed toward the door, the detective said, Don't forget your apple juice. Gotta build some strength for the trial. Junior discovered more tears than could have been found in 10,000 onions. His wife and his unborn baby. He had been willing to sacrifice his beloved Naomi, but maybe he would have found the cost too high if he had known that he was also sacrificing his first conceived child. This was too much. He was bereft. No more than a minute after Vanadium departed, a nurse arrived in a rush, no doubt sent by the hateful cop. Hard to tell through all the tears if she was a looker. A nice face, perhaps, but such a stick-thin body. Concerned that Junior's crying jag would trigger spasms of the abdominal muscles and ultimately another attack of hemorrhagic vomiting, the nurse had with her a tranquilizer. She wanted him to use the apple juice to wash down the pill. Junior would rather have chugged a beaker of carbolic acid than touched the juice, because the lunch tray had been brought to him by Thomas Vanadium. The maniac cop, determined to get his man one way or another, was capable of resorting to poison if he felt that the usual instruments of the law were unequal to the task. At Junior's insistence, the nurse poured a glass of water from the bedside carafe. Vanadium had been nowhere near the carafe. After a while, the tranquilizer and the relaxation techniques taught by Caesar Zed restored Junior's self-control. The nurse stayed with him until his storm of tears had passed. Clearly, he wasn't going to succumb to violent nervous emesis. She promised to bring him fresh apple juice after he complained that the serving before him had an odd taste. Alone, calm again, Junior was able to apply what was arguably the central tenet of the philosophy of Zen. Always look for the bright side. Regardless of the severity of a setback, no matter how dreadful a blow you sustained, you could always discover a bright side if you searched hard enough. The key to happiness, success, and mental health was utterly to ignore the negative, deny its power over you, and find reason to celebrate every development in life, including the cruelest catastrophe, by discovering the bright side to even the darkest hour. In this case, the bright side was blindingly bright. Having lost both a singularly beautiful wife and an unborn child, Junior would earn the sympathy, the pity, the love of any jury in front of whom the state might hope to defend against a wrongful death suit. Earlier, he'd been surprised by the visit from Knacker, Hiskus, and Nork. He hadn't thought he'd see their kind for days, and then he would have expected no more than a single attorney taking a low-key approach and making a modest proposal. Now he understood why they had descended in strength, eager to discuss redress, requital, restitutional apology. The coroner had informed them before the police that Naomi had been pregnant, and they had recognized the state's extreme vulnerability. The nurse returned with fresh apple juice, chilled and sweet. Junior sipped the beverage slowly. By the time he reached the bottom of the glass, he had come to the inescapable conclusion that Naomi had been hiding her pregnancy from him. In the 6 weeks since conception, she must have missed at least one menstrual period. She hadn't complained of morning sickness, but surely she'd experienced it. It was highly unlikely that she'd been unaware of her condition. He had never expressed opposition to starting a family. She'd had no reason to fear telling him that she was carrying their child. Regrettably, he had no choice but to conclude that she hadn't made up her mind whether to keep the baby or to seek out an illegal abortion without Junior's approval. She had been thinking about scraping his child out of her womb without even telling him. This insult, this outrage, this treachery stunned Junior. Inevitably, he had to wonder if Naomi had kept her pregnancy secret because, indeed, she suspected that the child wasn't her husband's. If blood tests revealed that Junior wasn't the father, Vanadium would have a motive. It wouldn't be the right motive because Junior truly hadn't known either that his wife was pregnant or that she was possibly screwing around with another man. But the detective would be able to sell it to a prosecutor, and the prosecutor would convince at least a few jurors. Naomi, you dumb, unfaithful bitch. He ardently wished that he hadn't killed her with such merciful swiftness. If he'd tortured her first, he would now have the memory of her suffering from which to take consolation. For a while, he looked for the bright side. It eluded him. He ate the lime jello, the soda crackers. Eventually, Junior remembered the quarter. He reached into the right pocket of the thin cotton bathrobe, but the coin wasn't there as it should have been. The left pocket also was empty. Chapter 27. Walter Panglow, the only mortician in Bright Beach, was a sweet-tempered wisp of a man who enjoyed puttering in his garden when he wasn't planting dead people. He grew prize roses and gave them away in great bouquets to the sick, to young people in love, to the school librarian on her birthday, to clerks who had been polite to him. His wife, Dorothea, adored him, not least of all because he had taken in her 80-year-old mother and treated that elderly lady as though she were both a duchess and a saint. He was equally generous to the poor, bearing their debt at cost, but with utmost dignity. Jacob Isaacson, twin brother of Edom, knew nothing negative about Panglow, but he didn't trust him. If the mortician had been caught prying gold teeth from the dead and carving satanic symbols in their buttocks, Jacob would have said, "It figures." If Panglow had saved bottles of infected blood from diseased cadavers, and if one day he ran through town, splashing it in the faces of unsuspecting citizens, Jacob would not have raised one eyebrow in surprise. Jacob trusted no one but Agnes and Edom. He trusted Joey Lampion, too, after years of wary observance. Now Joey was dead, and his corpse was in the embalming chamber of the Panglow funeral home. Currently, Jacob was far removed from the embalming chamber and intended never to set foot there alive. With Walter Panglow as his guide, he toured the casket selection in the funeral planning room. He wanted the most expensive box for Joey, but Joey, a modest and prudent man, would have disapproved. Instead, he selected a handsome but not ornate casket just above the median price. Deeply distressed that he was planning the funeral of a man as young as Joe Lampion, whom he had liked and admired, Panglow paused to express his disbelief and to murmur comforting words more to himself than to Jacob as each decision was made. With one hand on the chosen casket, he said, "Unbelievable, a traffic accident, and on the very day his son is born. So sad, so terribly sad." "Not so unbelievable," said Jacob. 45,000 people every year die in automobiles. Cars aren't transportation, they're death machines. Tens of thousands are disfigured, maimed for life. Whereas Edom feared the wrath of nature, Jacob knew that the true hand of doom was the hand of humankind. Not that trains are any better. Look at the Bakersfield crash back in '60. Santa Fe chief out of San Francisco smashed into an oil tank truck. 17 people crushed, burned in a river of fire. Jacob feared what men could do with clubs, knives, guns, bombs with their bare hands, but he was most preoccupied by the untended death that humanity brought upon itself with its devices, machines, and structures meant to improve the quality of life. 50 died in London in 57 when 2 trains crashed, and 112 people were crushed, torn, mangled in 52, also England. Frowning, Pangloss said, "Terrible, you're right. So many terrible things happen, but I don't see why trains... It's all the same. Cars, trains, ships, all the same," Jacob insisted. "You remember the Toyo Maru? Japanese ferry capsized back in September 54, 1,168 people dead. Or worse, in 48, off Manchuria, God Almighty, the boiler exploded on a Chinese merchant ship. 6,000 died. 6,000 on a single ship." Over the following hours, Walter Pangloss guided Jacob through the planning of the funeral. Jacob recounted the gruesome details of numerous airliner crashes, shipwrecks, train collisions, coal mine disasters, dam collapses, hotel fires, nightclub fires, pipeline and oil well explosions, munitions plant explosions. By the time all the details of mortuary and cemetery services were settled, Walter Pangloss had a nervous tic in his left cheek. His eyes were open wide as if he'd been so startled that his lids froze in a position of ascension, locked by a spasm of surprise. His hands must have grown clammy. He blotted them repeatedly on his suit. Aware of the mortician's new edginess, Jacob was convinced that his initial distrust of Pangloss was justified. This twitchy little guy seemed to have something to hide. Jacob didn't have to be a cop to recognize nervousness born of guilt. At the front door of the funeral home, as Pangloss was showing him out, Jacob leaned close. Joe Lampion didn't have any gold teeth. Pangloss seemed baffled. He was probably faking it. The diminutive mortician spoke a few comforting words instead of commenting on the dental history of the deceased. And when he put a consoling hand on Jacob's shoulder, Jacob cringed from his touch. Confused, Pangloss held out his right hand, but Jacob said, "Sorry, no offense, but I don't shake with anyone." "Well, certainly I understand," said Pangloss, slowly lowering the offered hand, although he clearly didn't understand at all. "It's just that you never know what anyone's hand has been up to recently," Jacob explained. "That respectable banker down the street might have 30 dismembered women buried in his backyard. The nice church-going lady next door might be sleeping in the same bed with the rotting corpse of a lover who tried to jilt her. And for a hobby, she makes jewelry from the finger bones of preschool children she's tortured or murdered." Pangloss safely tucked both hands in his pants pockets. "I've got hundreds of files on cases like that," said Jacob, "and much worse. If you're interested, I'll get you copies of some." "That's kind of you," Pangloss stammered, "but I have little time for reading, very little time." Reluctant to leave Joey's body with the oddly jumping mortician, Jacob nevertheless crossed the porch of the Victorian-style funeral home and left without glancing back. He walked 1 mile home, alert to passing traffic, especially cautious at intersections. His apartment, over the large garage, was reached by a set of exterior stairs. The space was divided into 2 rooms. The first was a combination living room and kitchenette, with a corner dining table seating 2. Beyond was a small bedroom with an adjoining bath. More walls than not in both rooms were lined with bookshelves and file cabinets. Here he kept numerous case studies of accidents, man-made disasters, serial killers, spree killers, proof undeniable that humanity was a fallen species, engaged in both the unintentional and calculated destruction of itself. In the neatly ordered bedroom, he removed his shoes. Stretching out on the bed, he stared at the ceiling, feeling useless. Agnes widowed, Bartholomew born fatherless. Too much, too much. Jacob didn't know how he could ever bear to look at Agnes when she came home from the hospital. The sorrow in her eyes would kill him as surely as a knife to the heart. Her lifelong optimism, her buoyancy, which she had miraculously sustained through so many difficult years, would never survive this. She would no longer be a rock of hope for him and Edom. Their future was despair, undiluted and unrelenting. Maybe he would get lucky and an airliner would fall out of the sky right now, right here, obliterating him in an instant. They lived too far from the nearest railroad tracks. He could not rationally expect a derailed train to crash through the garage. On a positive note, the apartment was heated by a gas furnace. A leak, a spark, an explosion. He would never have to see poor Agnes in her misery. After a while, when no plane crashed on top of him, Jacob got up, went into the kitchen, and mixed a batch of dough for Agnes's favorite treats, chocolate chip cookies with coconut and pecans. He considered himself to be a thoroughly useless man, taking up space in a world to which he contributed nothing, but he did have a talent for baking. He could take any recipe, even one from a world-class pastry chef, and improve upon it. When he was baking, the world seemed to be a less dangerous place. Sometimes, making a cake, he forgot to be afraid. The gas oven might blow up in his face, at last bringing him peace, but if it didn't, he would at least have cookies for Agnes. Chapter 28. Shortly before 1 o'clock, the Ch descended in a fury, eyes full of bloody intent, teeth bared, voices shrill. Junior had expected these singular creatures, and he needed them to be as monstrous as they had always been in the past. Nonetheless, he shrank back against his pillows in dismay when they exploded into the hospital room. Their faces were as fierce as those of painted cannibals coming off a fast. They gestured emphatically, spitting expletives along with tiny bits of lunch dislodged from their teeth by the force of their condemnations. Rudy Ch, Big Rude to his friends, was 6'4", as rough-hewn as a log sculpture carved with a woodsman's axe. In a green polyester suit with sleeves an inch too short, an unfortunate urine-yellow shirt, and a tie that might have been the national flag of a third-world country, famous for nothing but a lack of design sense. He looked like Dr. Frankenstein's beast gussied up for an evening of bar-hopping in Transylvania. "You better wise up, you tree-humping nitwit," Rudy advised Junior, grabbing the bed railing as if he might tear it off and use it to club his son-in-law senseless. If Big Rude was Naomi's father, he must not have contributed a single gene to her, must have somehow shock-fertilized his wife's egg with just his booming voice, with an orgasmic bellow, because nothing about Naomi, neither in appearance nor personality, had resembled him in the least. Sheena Ch, at 44, was more beautiful than any current movie star. She looked 20 years younger than her true age, and she so resembled her late daughter that Junior felt a rush of erotic nostalgia at the sight of her. Similarities between Naomi and her mom ended with appearances. Sheena was loud, crass, self-absorbed, and had the vocabulary of a brothel owner specializing in service to sailors with Tourette's syndrome. She stepped to the bed, bracketing Junior between her and Big Rude. The stream of obscene invective issuing from Sheena made Junior feel as if he had gotten in the way of a septic tank cleanout hose. To the foot of the bed slouched the third and final Ch, 24-year-old Caitlin, Naomi's big sister. Caitlin was the unfortunate sister, having inherited her looks from her father and her personality equally from both parents. A peculiar coppery cast enlivened her brown eyes, and in a certain slant of light, her angry glare could flash as red as blood. Caitlin had the piercing voice and talent for vituperation that marked her as a member of the Ch tribe, but for now she was content to leave the vocal assault to her parents. The stare with which she drilled Junior, however, if brought to bear on a promising geological formation, would core the earth and strike oil in minutes. They had not come to Junior yesterday in their grief, if in fact they had thought to grieve. They hadn't been close to Naomi, who'd once said she felt like Romulus and Remus raised by wolves, or like Tarzan if he'd fallen into the hands of nasty gorillas. To Junior, Naomi was Cinderella, sweet and good, and he was the love-struck prince who rescued her. The Ch had arrived post-grief, brought to the hospital by the news that Junior had expressed distaste at the prospect of profiting from his wife's tragic fall. They knew he had turned away Knacker, Hiskus, and Nork. His in-laws' chances of receiving compensation for their pain and suffering over Naomi's death were seriously compromised if her husband did not hold the state or county responsible. In this, as in nothing previously, they felt the need to stand united as a family. In the instant that Junior had shoved Naomi into the rotted railing, he had foreseen this visit from Rudy, Sheena, and Caitlin. He'd known he could pretend to be offended at the state's offer to put a price on his loss, could feign revulsion, could resist convincingly, until gradually, after grueling days or weeks, he reluctantly allowed the indefatigable Hackachacks to browbeat him into a despairing, exhausted, disgusted compliance with their greed. By the time his ferocious in-laws had finished with him, Junior would have won the sympathy of Knacker, Hiscus, Nork, and everyone else who might have harbored doubts about his role in Naomi's demise. Perhaps even Thomas Vanadium would find his suspicion worn away. Shrieking like carrion-eating birds waiting for their wounded dinner to die, the Hackachacks twice drew stern warnings from nurses. They were told to quiet down and respect the patients in neighboring rooms. More than twice, worried nurses and even a resident internist braved the tumult to check on Junior's condition. They asked if he really felt up to entertaining visitors, these visitors. "They're all the family I have," Junior said with what he hoped sounded like sorrow and long-suffering love. This claim wasn't true. His father, an unsuccessful artist and highly successful alcoholic, lived in Santa Monica, California. His mother, divorced when Junior was 4, had been committed to an insane asylum 12 years ago. He rarely saw them. He hadn't told Naomi about them. Neither of his parents was a resume enhancer. After the latest concerned nurse departed, Sheena leaned close. She cruelly pinched Junior's cheek between thumb and forefinger, as if she might tear off a goblet of flesh and pop it into her mouth. "Get this through your head, you shit for brains. I lost a daughter, a precious daughter, my Naomi, the light of my life." Caitlin glared at her mother as though betrayed. "Naomi, she popped out of my oven 20 years ago, not out of yours," Sheena continued in a fierce whisper. "If anyone's suffering here, it's me, not you. Who are you, anyway? Some guy who's been boinking her for a couple of years, that's all you are. I'm her mother. You can never know my pain. And if you don't stand with this family to make these wankers pay up big time, I'll personally cut your balls off while you're sleeping and feed them to my cat." "You don't have a cat." "I'll buy one," Sheena promised. Junior knew she'd fulfill her threat, even if he hadn't wanted money himself, and he wanted it. He would never dare thwart Sheena. Even Rudy, as huge as Bigfoot and as amoral as a skink, was afraid of this woman. All 3 of these sorry excuses for human beings were money mad. Rudy owned 6 successful used car dealerships, and his pride, a Ford franchise, selling new and used vehicles in 5 Oregon communities, but he liked to live large. He also visited Vegas 4 times a year, pouring money away as casually as he might empty his bladder. Sheena enjoyed Vegas too and was a fiend for shopping. Caitlin liked men, pretty ones, but since she might be mistaken for her father in a dimly lighted room, her hunks came at a price. At one point late in the afternoon, as all 3 Hackachacks were hurling scorn and invective at Junior, he noticed Vanadium standing in the doorway, observing. Perfect. He pretended not to see the cop, and when next he sneaked a look, he discovered that Vanadium had vanished like a wraith, a thick slab of a wraith. During the day and then following a dinner break, the Hackachacks persisted. The hospital had never witnessed such a spectacle. Shifts changed and new nurses came to attend to Junior in greater numbers than necessary, using any excuse to get a glimpse of the freak show. By the time the family was ushered out, protesting at the end of evening visiting hours, Junior hadn't succumbed to their pressure. If his conversion was to appear convincingly reluctant, he would have to resist them for at least another few days. Alone at last, he was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and intellectually. Murder itself was easy, but the aftermath was more draining than he had anticipated. Although the ultimate liability settlement with the state was certain to leave him financially secure for life, the stress was so great that he wondered in his darker moments if the reward would prove to be worth the risk. He decided that he must never again kill so impetuously, never. In fact, he vowed never again to kill at all, except in self-defense. Soon he would be rich, with much to lose if he was caught. Homicide was a marvelous adventure. Sadly, however, it was an entertainment that he could no longer afford. If he had known that he would break his solemn vow twice before the month was ended, and that neither victim, unfortunately, would be a hackachak, he might not have fallen asleep so easily, and he might not have dreamed of cleverly stealing hundreds of quarters out of Thomas Vanadium's pockets while the baffled detective searched for them in vain. Chapter 29. Monday morning, far above Joe Lampion's grave, the translucent blue California sky shed a rain of light so pure and clear that the world seemed to have been washed clean of all its stains. An overflow crowd of mourners had attended the services at St. Thomas's Church, standing shoulder to shoulder at the back of the nave, through the narthex and across the sidewalk outside, and now everyone appeared to have come to the cemetery as well. Assisted by Edom and Jacob, Agnes, in a wheelchair, was rolled across the grass between the headstones to her husband's final resting place. Although no longer in danger of renewed hemorrhaging, she was under doctor's orders to avoid strain. In her arms she held Bartholomew. The infant was not heavily bundled, for the weather was unseasonably mild. Agnes wouldn't have been able to bear her ordeal without the baby. This small weight in her arms was an anchor dropped in the sea of the future, preventing her from drifting back into memories of days gone by. So many good days with Joey. Memories which, at this critical moment, would strike like hammer blows upon her heart. Later they would comfort her. Not yet. The mound of earth beside the grave had been disguised by piles of flowers and cut ferns. The suspended casket was skirted with black material to conceal the yawning grave beneath it. Although a believer, Agnes was not at the moment able to spread the flowers and ferns of faith over the hard, ugly reality of death. Cowled and skeletal, death was here all right, scattering his seeds among all her gathered friends, one day to reap them. Flanking the wheelchair, Edom and Jacob spent less time watching the graveside service than studying the sky. Both brothers frowned at that cloudless blue as though seeing thunderheads. Agnes supposed Jacob trembled in anticipation of the crash of an airliner, or at least a light aircraft. Edom might be calculating the odds that this serene place, at this specific hour, would be the impact point for one of those planet-killing asteroids that reputedly wipe most life off the Earth every few 100,000 years or so. A spirit-shredding bleakness clawed at her, but she couldn't permit it to leave her in tatters. If she traded hope for despair, as her brothers had done, Bartholomew would be finished before he'd begun. She owed him optimism, lessons in the joy of life. After the service, among those who came to Agnes at graveside, trying to express the inexpressible, was Paul Damascus, the owner of Damascus Pharmacy on Ocean Avenue. Of Mid-Eastern extraction, he had dark olive skin and incredibly rust-red hair. With his rust-red eyebrows, lashes, and mustache, his handsome face looked like that of a bronze statue with a curious patina. Paul knelt on one knee beside her wheelchair. This momentous day, Agnes. This momentous day with all of its beginnings. He said this as though confident Agnes would understand what he meant, with a smile and with a glint in his eyes that almost became a wink, as if they were members of a secret society in which these repeated words were code, embodying a complex meaning other than what was apparent to the uninitiated. Before Agnes was able to respond, Paul sprang up and moved away. Other friends knelt and crouched and bent to her, and she lost sight of the pharmacist as he moved off through the dispersing crowd. This momentous day, Agnes. This momentous day with all of its beginnings. What an odd thing to say. A sense of mystery overcame Agnes, unnerving but not entirely or even primarily unpleasant. She shivered, and Edom, thinking that she caught a chill, slipped off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. This Monday morning in Oregon was bleak, with the swollen, dark bellies of rain clouds swagging low over the cemetery, a dreary send-off for Naomi, even though rain was not yet falling. Standing at graveside, Junior was in a foul mood. He was weary of pretending to be deep in grief. 3.5 days had passed since he'd pushed his wife off the tower, and in that time he'd had no real fun. He was gregarious by nature and never one to turn down a party invitation. He liked to laugh, to love, to live, but he couldn't enjoy life when he must remember at all times to appear bereft and to keep sorrow in his voice. Worse, to make credible his anguish and to avoid suspicion, he would have to play the devastated widower for at least another couple of weeks, perhaps for as long as a month. As a dedicated follower of the self-improvement advice of Dr. Caesar Zed, Junior was impatient with those who were ruled by sentimentality and by the expectations of society, and now he was required to pretend to be one of them, and for an interminable period of time. Being uniquely sensitive, he had mourned Naomi with his entire body, with violent emesis and pharyngeal bleeding and incontinence. His grief had been so racking that it might have killed him. Enough was enough. Only a small group of mourners gathered for this service. Junior and Naomi had been so intensely involved with each other that, unlike many young married couples, they had made few friends. The Ch were present, of course. Junior had not yet agreed to join them in their pursuit of blood money. They would give him little privacy or rest until they had what they wanted. Rudy's blue suit, as usual, pinched and shorted his shambling frame. Here in a boneyard, he appeared to be not just a man with a bad tailor, but a grave robber who looted the dead for his wardrobe. Against the backdrop of granite monuments, Caitlin hulked like a moldering presence from beyond, risen out of a rotting box to take vengeance on the living. Rudy and Caitlin frequently glared at Junior, and Sheena most likely gouged him with her gaze too, but he couldn't quite see her eyes through her black veil. A stunning figure in her tight black dress, the bereaved mother was likewise hampered by this accessory of grief, because she had to hold her wristwatch close to her face to see the time, when more than once the service seemed interminable. Junior intended to capitulate later today at a gathering of family and friends. Rudy had organized a buffet in the showroom at his new Ford dealership, which he'd closed for business until 3 o'clock. Lamentations, lunch, and moving reminiscences of the deceased shared among the shiny new Thunderbirds, Galaxies, and Mustangs. That venue would provide Junior with the witnesses he required for his reluctant, tearful, and perhaps even angry concession to the Ch insistent materialism. Elsewhere in the cemetery, about 150 yards away, another interment service, with a much larger group of mourners, had begun prior to this one for Naomi. Now it was over and the people were dispersing to their cars. From a distance and through a scattering of trees, Junior wasn't able to discern much about the other funeral, but he was pretty sure many, if not most of the crowd were Negroes. He surmised, therefore, that the person being buried was a Negro too. This surprised him. Of course, Oregon was not the Deep South. It was a progressive state. Nevertheless, he was surprised. Oregon wasn't home to many Negroes either, a handful compared to those in other states. And yet, until now, Junior supposed that they had their own cemeteries. He had nothing against Negroes. He didn't wish them ill. He wasn't prejudiced. Live and let live. He believed that as long as they stayed with their own kind and abided by the rules of a polite society, like everyone else, they had a right to live in peace. This colored person's grave, however, was uphill of Naomi's. Over time, as the body decomposed up there, its juices would mix with the soil. When rain saturated the ground, subsurface drainage would carry those juices steadily downslope until they seeped into Naomi's grave and mingled with her remains. This seemed highly inappropriate to Junior. Nothing he could do about it now. Having Naomi's body moved to another grave, in a cemetery without Negroes would cause a lot of talk. He didn't want to draw more attention to himself. He decided, however, to see an attorney about a will, and soon. He wanted to specify that he was to be cremated and that his ashes were to be entombed in one of those memorial walls well above ground level where nothing was likely to seep into them. Only one member of the distant funeral party did not disperse toward the line of cars on the service road. A man in a dark suit headed downhill, between the headstones and the monuments, directly toward Naomi's grave. Junior couldn't imagine why some Negro stranger would want to intrude. He hoped there wouldn't be trouble. The minister had finished. The service was over. No one came to Junior with condolences because they would see him again shortly at the Ford dealership buffet. By now he recognized that the man approaching from the other graveside service was neither a Negro nor a stranger. Detective Thomas Vanadium was annoying enough to be an honorary hack Ch. Junior considered leaving before Vanadium, still 75 yards away, arrived. He was afraid he would appear to be fleeing. The funeral director and his assistant were the only people other than Junior remaining at the grave. They asked if they might lower the casket or if he would rather that they wait until he was gone. Junior gave them permission to proceed. The two men detached and rolled up the pleated green skirt that hung from the rectangular frame of the graveyard winch on which the casket was suspended. Green rather than black because Naomi loved nature. Junior had been thoughtful about the details of the service. Now the whole was revealed, damp earthen walls. In the shadow of the casket, the bottom of the grave was dark and hidden from view. Vanadium arrived and stood beside Junior. His black suit was cheap, but it fit better than Rudy's. The detective carried a single, long-stemmed white rose. Two cranks operated the winch. The mortician and his assistant turned the handles in unison, and as the mechanism creaked softly, the casket slowly descended into the hole. Finally, Vanadium said, according to the lab report, the baby she was carrying was almost certainly yours. Junior said nothing. He was still upset with Naomi for hiding the pregnancy from him, but he was delighted that the baby would have been his. Now Vanadium couldn't claim that Naomi's infidelity and the resultant bastard had been the motive for murder. Even as this news pleased Junior, it also saddened him. He was not merely interring a lovely wife, but also his first child. He was burying his family. Refusing to give the cop the satisfaction of a reply to the news of the unborn baby's paternity, Junior stared unwaveringly into the grave and said, "Whose funeral were you attending?" "A friend's daughter. They say she died in a traffic accident down in San Francisco. She was even younger than Naomi." "Tragic. Her string's been cut too soon. Her music's ended prematurely," Junior said, feeling confident enough to dish a serving of the maniac cop's half-baked theory of life back to him. "There's a discord in the universe now, Detective. No one can know how the vibrations of that discord will come to affect you, me, all of us." Repressing a smirk, feigning a respectful solemnity, he dared to glance at Vanadium, but the detective stared into Naomi's grave as though he hadn't heard the mockery, or having heard it, didn't recognize it for what it was. Then Junior saw the blood on the right cuff of Vanadium's shirt, blood dripping from his hand too. The thorns had not been stripped from the long stem of the white rose. Vanadium clutched it so tightly that the sharp points punctured his meaty palm. He seemed to be unaware of his wounds. Suddenly and seriously creeped out, Junior wanted to get away from this nutcase. Yet he was frozen by morbid fascination. "This momentous day," Thomas Vanadium said quietly, still gazing into the grave, "seems full of terrible endings. But like every day, it's actually full of nothing but beginnings." With a solid thump, Naomi's fine casket reached the bottom of the hole. This sure looked like an ending to Junior. "This momentous day," the detective murmured. Deciding that he didn't need an exit line, Junior headed toward the service road in his Suburban. The pendulous bellies of the rain-swollen clouds were no darker than when he had first come to the cemetery, yet they appeared more ominous now than earlier. When he reached the Suburban, he looked back toward the grave. The mortician and his assistant had nearly finished dismantling the frame of the winch. Soon a worker would close the hole. While Junior watched, Vanadium extended his right arm over the open grave. In his hand, the white rose, its thorns slick with his blood. He dropped the bloom and it fell out of sight into the gaping earth atop Naomi's casket. On this Monday evening, with both Femi and the sun having traveled into darkness, Celestina sat down to dinner with her mother and her father in the dining room of the parsonage. Other members of the family, friends, and parishioners were all gone. Uncanny quiet filled the house. Always before, this home had been full of love and warmth, and still it was, although from time to time, Celestina felt a fleeting chill that couldn't be attributed to a draft. Never previously had this house seemed in the least empty, but an emptiness invaded it now, the void left by her lost sister. In the morning, she would return to San Francisco with her mom. She was reluctant to leave Daddy to adapt to this emptiness alone. Nevertheless, they must leave without delay. The baby would be released from the hospital as soon as the minor infection cleared up. Now that Grace and the Reverend had been granted temporary custody pending adoption, preparations had to be made for Celestina to be able to fulfill her commitment to raise the child. As usual, dinner was by candlelight. Celestina's parents were romantics. Also, they believed that gracious dining has a civilizing effect on children, even if the fare is frequently simple meatloaf. They are not among those Baptists who forsook drink, but they served wine only on special occasions. At the first dinner following a funeral, after the prayers and the tears, family tradition required a toast to the dearly departed, a single glass, Merlot. On this occasion, the flickering candlelight contributed not to a romantic mood, not to a merely civilizing ambiance, but to a reverential hush. With slow, ceremonial grace, her father opened the bottle and served 3 portions. His hands trembled. Reflections of lambent candle flames gilded the curved bowls of the long-stem glasses. They gathered at one end of the dining table. The dark purple wine shimmered with ruby highlights when Celestina raised her glass. The Reverend made the first toast, speaking so softly that his tremulous words seemed to bloom in Celestina's mind and heart rather than to fall upon her ears. To gentle Femi, who is with God. Grace said, to my sweet Femi, who will never die. The toast now came to Celestina. To Femi, who will be with me in memory every hour of every day for the rest of my life, until she is with me again for real. And to this most momentous day. To this momentous day, her father and mother repeated. The wine tasted bitter, but Celestina knew that it was sweet. The bitterness was in her, not in the legacy of the grape. She felt that she had failed her sister. She didn't know what more she could have done. But if she had been wiser and more insightful and more attentive, surely this terrible loss would not have come to pass. What good was she to anybody? What good could she ever hope to be if she couldn't even save her little sister? Candle flames blurred into bright smears, and the faces of her good parents shimmered like the half-seen countenances of angels in dreams. I know what you're thinking, her mother said, reaching across the table and placing one hand over Celestina's. I know how useless you feel, how helpless, how small, but you must remember this. Her father gently closed one of his big hands over theirs. Grace, proving again the aptness of her name, said the one thing most likely in time to bring true peace to Celestina. Remember Bartholomew. Chapter 30. The rain that had threatened to wash out the morning funeral finally rinsed the afternoon. But by nightfall, the Oregon sky was clean and dry. From horizon to horizon spread an infinity of icy stars, and at the center of them hung a bright sickle moon as silver as steel. Shortly before 10 o'clock, Junior returned to the cemetery and left his Suburban where the Negro mourners had parked earlier in the day. His was the only vehicle on the service road. Curiosity brought him here. Curiosity and a talent for self-preservation. Earlier, Vanadium had not come to Naomi's graveside as a mourner. He had been there as a cop on business. Perhaps he had been at the other funeral on business too. After following the blacktop 50 feet, Junior headed downhill through the close-cropped grass between the tombstones. He switched on his flashlight and trod cautiously, for the ground sloped unevenly and, in places, remained soggy and slippery from the rain. The silence in the city of the dead was complete. The night lay breathless, stirring not one whisper from the stationed evergreens that stood sentinel over generations of bones. When he located the new grave, approximately where he guessed that it would be, he was surprised to find a black granite headstone already set in place, instead of a temporary marker painted with the name of the deceased. This memorial was modest, neither large nor complicated in design. Nevertheless, often the carvers in this line of business followed days after the morticians because the stones to which they applied their craft demanded more labor and less urgency than the cold bodies that rested under them. Junior assumed the dead girl had come from a family of stature in the Negro community, which would explain the stone carver's accelerated service. Vanadium, according to his own words, was a friend of the family. Consequently, the father was most likely a police officer. Junior approached the headstone from behind, circled it, and shone the flashlight on the chiseled facts. Beloved daughter and sister, Seraphim, a Theonema White. Stunned, he switched off the flashlight. He felt naked, exposed, caught. In the chilly darkness, his breath plumed visibly, frosted by moonlight. The rapidity and raggedness of his radiant exhalations would have marked him as a guilty man if witnesses had been present. He hadn't killed this one, of course, a traffic accident. Wasn't that what Vanadium had said? 10 months ago, following tendon surgery for a leg injury, Seraphim had been an outpatient at the rehab hospital where Junior worked. She was scheduled for therapy 3 days a week. Initially, when told that his patient was a Negro, Junior had been reluctant to serve as her physical therapist. Her program of rehab required mostly structured exercise to restore flexibility and to gain strength in the affected limb, but some massage would be involved as well, which made him uncomfortable. He had nothing against men or women of color. Live and let live. One earth, one people, all of that. On the other hand, one needed to believe in something. Junior didn't clutter his mind with superstitious nonsense, or allow himself to be constrained by the views of bourgeois society or by its smug concepts of right and wrong, good and evil. From Zed, he'd learned that he was the sole master of his universe. Self-realization through self-esteem was his doctrine. Total freedom and guiltless pleasure were the rewards of faithful adherence to his principles. What he believed in, the only thing he believed in, was Junior Cain, and in this he was a fiercely passionate believer, devout unto himself. Consequently, as Caesar had explained, when any man was clear-headed enough to cast off all the false faiths and inhibiting rules that confused humanity, when he was sufficiently enlightened to believe only in himself, he would be able to trust his instincts, for they would be free of society's toxic views, and he would be assured of success and happiness if always he followed these gut feelings. Instinctively, he knew he should not give massages to Negroes. He sensed that somehow he would be physically or morally polluted by this contact. He couldn't easily refuse the assignment. Later that year, President Lyndon Johnson, with strong backing from both the Democratic and the Republican parties, was expected to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and currently it was dangerous for clear-headed believers in the primacy of self to express their healthy instincts, which might be mistakenly perceived as racial prejudice. He could be fired. Fortunately, just as he was about to declare his gut feelings to his superior and risk dismissal, he saw his potential patient. At 15, Seraphim was breathtakingly beautiful, in her own way as striking as Naomi, and instinct told Junior that the chance of being physically or morally polluted by her was negligible. Like all women past puberty and this side of the grave, she was attracted to him. She never told him as much, not in words, but he detected this attraction in the way she looked at him, in the tone that she used when she spoke his name. Throughout 3 weeks of therapy, Seraphim revealed countless but significant proofs of her desire. During the girl's final appointment, Junior discovered she would be home alone that same night. Her parents had a function she wasn't required to attend. She appeared to reveal this inadvertently, quite innocently. However, Junior was a bloodhound when it came to smelling seduction, regardless of how subtle the scent. Later, when he showed up at her door, she pretended surprise and uneasiness. He realized that, like so many women, Seraphim wanted it, asked for it, yet had no place in her self-image to accommodate the truth that she was sexually aggressive. She wanted to think of herself as shy, demure, virginal, as innocent as a minister's daughter ought to be, which meant that to get what she wanted, she required Junior to be a brute. He was happy to oblige. As it turned out, Seraphim was a virgin. This thrilled Junior. He was inflamed also by the thought of ravishing her in her parents' house, and by the kinky fact that their house was a parsonage. Better still, he was able to have the girl to the accompaniment of her father's voice, which was even kinkier than doing her in the parsonage. When Junior rang the bell, Seraphim had been in her room, listening to a tape of a sermon her father was composing. The good Reverend usually dictated a first draft, which his daughter then transcribed. For 3 hours, Junior went at her mercilessly to the rhythms of her father's voice. The Reverend's presence was deliciously perverse and stimulating to his sense of erotic invention. When Junior was finished, there was nothing sexual that Seraphim could ever do with a man that she had not learned from him. She struggled, wept, pretended disgust, faked shame, swore to bring the police down on him. Another man, not as highly skilled at reading women as Junior, might have thought the girl's resistance was genuine, that her charges of rape were sincere. Any other man might have backed off, but Junior was neither fooled nor confused. Once satiated, what she desired was a reason to deceive herself into believing that she was not a slut, that she was a victim. She didn't really want to tell anyone what he had done to her. Instead, she was asking him indirectly, but indisputably, to provide her with an excuse to keep their passionate encounter secret. An excuse that would also allow her to continue to pretend that she had not begged for everything he'd done to her. Because he genuinely liked women and hoped always to please them, always to be discreet and chivalrous and giving, Junior did as she wished, spinning a vivid account of the grisly vengeance he would take if Seraphim told anyone what he'd done to her. Vlad the Impaler, the historical inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula, thank you, Book of the Month Club, could not have imagined bloodier or more horrific tortures and mutilations than those that Junior promised to visit upon the Reverend, his wife, and Seraphim herself. Pretending to terrorize the girl excited him, and he was perceptive enough to see that she was equally excited by pretending to be terrorized. He added verisimilitude to his threats by concluding with a few hard punches where they wouldn't show, in her breasts and belly, and then he went home to Naomi, to whom he'd been married at that time less than 5 months. To his surprise, when Naomi expressed an interest in romance, Junior was a bull again. He would have thought he had left his best stuff at Reverend Harrison White's parsonage. He loved Naomi, of course, and never could deny her. Although he had been especially sweet to her that night, if he had known that they would have less than a year together before fate tore her from him, he might have been even sweeter. As Junior stood at Seraphim's grave, his breath smoked from him in the still night air, as though he were a dragon. He wondered if the girl had talked. Perhaps, reluctant to admit to herself that she had yearned for him to do everything that he'd done, she had slowly been inflamed by guilt until she convinced herself that she had indeed been raped. Psychotic little bitch. Did this explain why Thomas Vanadium suspected Junior when no one else did? If the detective believed that Seraphim had been raped, his natural desire to exact vengeance for his friend's daughter might motivate him to commit the relentless harassment that Junior had endured now for 4 days. On second thought, no. If Seraphim had told anyone she'd been raped, the police would have been at Junior's doorstep in minutes with a warrant for his arrest. No matter that they would have no proof. In this age of high sympathy for the previously oppressed, the word of a teenage Negro girl would have greater weight than Junior's clean record, fine reputation, and heartfelt denials. Vanadium was surely unaware of any connection between Junior and Seraphim White, and now the girl could never talk. Junior remembered the very words the detective had used. They say she died in a traffic accident. They say. As usual, Vanadium had spoken in a monotone, putting no special emphasis on those 2 words. Yet Junior sensed that the detective harbored doubts about the explanation of the girl's death. Maybe every accidental death was suspicious to Vanadium. His obsessive hounding of Junior might be his standard operating procedure. After too many years investigating homicides, after too much experience of human evil, perhaps he had grown both misanthropic and paranoid. Junior could almost feel sorry for the sad, stocky, haunted detective, deranged by years of difficult public service. The bright side was easy to see. If Vanadium's reputation among other cops and among prosecutors was that of a paranoid, a pathetic chaser after phantom perpetrators. His unsupported belief that Naomi was murdered would be discounted, and if every death was suspicious to him, then he would quickly lose interest in Junior and move on to a new enthusiasm, harassing some other poor devil. Supposing that this new enthusiasm was an attempt to uncover skullduggery in Seraphime's accident, then the girl would be doing Junior a service even after her demise. Whether or not the traffic accident was an accident, Junior hadn't had anything to do with it. Gradually he grew calm. His great frosty exhalations diminished to a diaphanous dribble that evaporated 2 inches from his lips. Reading the dates on the headstone, he saw that the minister's daughter had died the 7th of January, the day after Naomi had fallen from the fire tower. If ever asked, Junior would have no trouble accounting for his whereabouts on that day. He switched off the flashlight and stood solemnly for a moment, paying his respects to Seraphime. She had been so sweet, so innocent, so supple, so exquisitely proportioned. Ropes of sadness bound his heart, but he didn't cry. If their relationship had not been limited to a single evening of passion, if they had not been of 2 worlds, if she had not been underage and therefore jailbait, they might have had an open romance, and then her death would have touched him more deeply. A ghostly crescent of pale light shimmered on the black granite. Junior looked up from the tombstone to the moon. It seemed like a wickedly sharp silver scimitar suspended by a filament more fragile than a human hair. Although it was just the moon, it unnerved him. Suddenly the night seemed watchful. Without using his flashlight, depending only on the moon, he ascended through the cemetery to the service road. When he reached the Suburban and closed his right hand around the handle on the driver's door, he felt something peculiar against his palm, a small, cold object balanced there. Startled, he snatched his hand back. The object fell, ringing faintly against the pavement. He switched on his flashlight. In the beam on the blacktop, a silver disk, like a full moon in a night sky. A quarter. The quarter, surely. The one that had not been in his robe pocket where it should have been the previous Friday. He swept the immediate area with the flashlight, and shadows spun with shadows, waltzing spirits in the ballroom of the night. No sign of vanadium. Some of the taller monuments offered hidden places on both sides of the cemetery road, as did the thicker trunks of the larger trees. The detective could be anywhere out there or already gone. After a brief hesitation, Junior picked up the coin. He wanted to fling it into the graveyard, send it spinning far into the darkness. If Vanadium was watching, however, he would interpret the pitch of the coin to mean that his unconventional strategy was working, that Junior's nerves were frayed to the breaking point. With an adversary as indefatigable as this cuckoo cop, you dared never show weakness. Junior dropped the coin into a pants pocket, switched off the light, listened. He half expected to hear Thomas Vanadium in the distance, softly singing, "Someone to watch over me." After a minute, he slipped his hand into his pocket. The quarter was still there. He got in the Suburban, pulled the door shut, but didn't at once start the engine. In retrospect, coming here wasn't a wise move. Evidently, the detective had been following him. Now, Vanadium would puzzle out a motive for this late-night graveyard tour. Junior, putting himself in the detective's place, could think of a few reasons for this visit to Seraphime's grave. Unfortunately, not one of them supported his contention that he was an innocent man. At worst, Vanadium might begin to wonder if Junior had a link to Seraphim, might uncover the physical therapy connection, and in his paranoia, might erroneously conclude that Junior had something to do with her traffic accident. That was nuts, of course, but the detective was evidently not a rational man. At best, Vanadium might decide Junior had come here to learn what other funeral his nemesis had attended, which was in fact the true motivation, but this made it clear that Junior feared him and was striving to stay one step ahead of him. Innocent men didn't go to such lengths. As far as the fruitcake cop was concerned, Junior might as well have painted "I killed Naomi" on his forehead. He nervously fingered the fabric of his slacks, outlining the quarter in his pocket. Still there. Calcimine moonlight cast an arctic illusion over the boneyard. The grass was as eerily silver as snow at night, and gravestones tilted like pressure ridges of ice in a fractured wasteland. The black service road seemed to come out of nowhere, then to vanish into a void, and Junior suddenly felt dangerously isolated, alone as he had never been, and vulnerable. Vanadium was no ordinary cop, as he himself had said. In his obsession, convinced that Junior had murdered Naomi, and impatient with the need to find evidence to prove it, what was to stop the detective if he decided to deal out justice himself? What was to prevent him from walking up to this Suburban right now and shooting his suspect point blank? Junior locked the door. He started the engine and drove out of the cemetery faster than was prudent on the winding service road. On the way home, he repeatedly checked the rearview mirror. No vehicle followed him. He lived in a rental house, a 2-bedroom bungalow. Enormous deodar cedars with layers of drooping branches surrounded the place, and usually they seemed sheltering, but now they loomed ominous. Entering the kitchen from the garage, snapping on the overhead light, he was prepared to find Vanadium sitting at the pine table, enjoying a cup of coffee. The kitchen was deserted. Room by room, closet by closet, Junior conducted a search for the detective. The cop was not here. Relieved but still wary, he toured the small house again to be sure that all the doors and windows were locked. After undressing for the night, he sat on the edge of the bed for a while, rubbing the coin between the thumb and forefinger of his right hand, brooding about Thomas Vanadium. He tried rolling it across his knuckles. He dropped it repeatedly. Eventually, he put the quarter on the nightstand, switched off the lamp, and slipped into bed. He could not sleep. This morning he had changed the sheets. Naomi's scent was no longer with him in the bedclothes. He had not yet disposed of her personal effects. In the dark, he went to the dresser, opened a drawer, and found a cotton sweater that she had worn recently. At the bed, he spread the garment across his pillow. Lying down, he pressed his face into the sweater. The sweet, subtle scent of Naomi was as effective as a lullaby, and soon he dozed off. When he woke in the morning, he raised his head from the pillow to look at the alarm clock and saw the 25 cents on his nightstand, 2 dimes and a nickel. Junior flung back the covers and came to his feet, but his knees proved weak, and he sat at once on the edge of the bed. The room was bright enough for him to confirm that he was no longer alone. The interior of the box in which Naomi now resided could be no more silent than this house. The coins were arranged atop a playing card which lay face down. He slipped the card out from under the change, turned it over. A joker. Printed in red block letters across the card was the name, Bartholomew.